Okay. So our question for today, I don't remember who gave us this question, but someone asked, what does the religious landscape in Reading look like? And we did do a few weeks ago the class on denominations and different positions and theological ideas and how we're organized and things like that. But today we're going to talk more specifically about Shasta County and what our neighbors look like in terms of religious affiliations. So to get us started, I have a few kind of background things to share with you, and then we're going to go into a kind of description of the different types of religions that are present in Reading. So my assumption that I bring to this question is that denominations are not bad. I believe we had a class on, how do we engage non-believers, and we talked about, how the Bible really tells us that we should just treat them like we do anybody else and be kind to them and show God's love to them. From a Lutheran perspective. And so it's a little bit more controversial, I think, to say that other religions are not bad, that it's okay to be a Buddhist or a Sikh or a Jew. But my assumption is that at minimum, different Christian denominations are not bad. And the reason I have to say that is because there are many Christian groups that are very adamantly against denominations, period, within groups that are arguing and fighting over particular types of theological and social ideas like homosexual marriage and ordination and women preaching in the church, all these kinds of things. There's this idea that splitting off from each other over these issues is sinful, is against the will of God. And usually those kinds of assumptions are based on something along the lines of like a John chapter 17, verses 22 to 23, which says in its completion, this is from when Jesus is praying in the Garden of Gethsemane to God. And like we talked about last week, John likes to have his Jesus talk a lot. And this is one of those long discourse kind of things, but it's in the form of a prayer to God. And Jesus says, "The glory that you have given me, I have given them, so that they may be one as we are one. I in them and you in me, that they may become completely one, so that the world may know that you have sent me and have loved them even as you have loved me." And so the interpretation here is that if we as the church are not completely one, as in all agreeing on all of the different theological and social ideas and worshiping in the same way and behaving in the same way and believing the same things, then there is something wrong with that, because oneness is required for the world to see the message about Jesus. And so our lack of unity, or at least our lack of uniformity, I would say, is a problem. And, if you just go off of this passage, then, you could interpret it that way. But my position is that there are other possibilities, other passages that might speak to this issue. For example, 1 Corinthians chapter 12, verses 4 to 6. "Now there are varieties of gifts, but the same Spirit, and there are varieties of services, but the same Lord, and there are varieties of activities, but it is the same God who activates all of them in everyone." So typically this is used for, talking about individuals. Well, I can, I can write a lesson plan and teach it to someone, but somebody else can't do that, but they can, they're really good at praying, or they're really good at making phone calls and talking to people and making them feel like they're part of the community, those kinds of things. But there's no reason, I don't think, why we couldn't interpret this in terms of different churches, in terms of denominations. They're culturally, I think the church needs to find ways to be relevant to people where they are, with the assumptions that they make about how life is supposed to be lived and the limitations that are placed on them because of their governments and things like that. And I don't see anything wrong with that. I think that denominations help us to connect to people where they are, because the good news is going to look a little bit different to each person depending on the experiences that they've had. If I am, financially and physically destitute, if I am starving, then the good news is not, Jesus is forgiving your sins. I don't care about that. I'm hungry. The good news for me in that situation is Jesus is here to create a community where we are going to take care of each other and meet each other's physical needs. But if I am feeling guilty and having a really hard time with my relationships and have done terrible things that just haunt me constantly day and night, then the good news can be a little different. It can be, Jesus is here to take away your sins, to forgive you, to give you a fresh start. And so, different emphases, different ways of speaking the good news, I think, are legitimate and important and necessary, because people are different and cultures are different. So I have no problem with denominations, on the face of it. Like, the idea of different denominations, I don't think is bad in and of itself. Now, I do think that there can be denominations that misinterpret, that are making their decisions based on political or social desires of the leadership and things like that. So I'm not saying that every denomination is good in and of itself, but the idea of a denomination is not bad, I don't think. I think you kind of have to look at each denomination and say, are you different because you are meeting different needs, or are you different because you want to control something that these other people are not controlling in the way that you would like them to control it, or that you personally want to have the control? And we'll talk a little bit more about that later when we get to some of the types of churches that we're going to be talking about today. So any comments or questions about any of that?
I agree with your 1 Corinthians. Well, I agree with both of them. I mean, I think that it is the same God who is who activates all of them. I think there's only one God. I guess I come back to that. There is only one God, but there are a variety of ways that people worship him.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I agree. Okay, so moving on to something that seems like it's completely out of left field, but I think this is important. I'm not going to tell you anything that you don't already know, but I just want to point this out and make it explicit, because I think this is going to be really important for our conversation today. What is your average Reddingite or Redian? I don't know what are we called here. What is the stereotypical mindset of somebody who resides in Redding or Shasta County? Well, the idea of heavy emphasis on independence. We are isolated here, and I think a lot of people are isolated on purpose, whether it's because they like that Redding is not near any other cities, and so we're kind of on our own here, or they even don't want to be in Redding itself. They want to be out in the country by themselves because they like to be on their own. They like the privacy. They like to feel like they are self-sufficient, that they don't need anybody to help them. They can make it on their own. This is kind of your standard, standard fare for someone who lives in Redding, at least in terms of what people think we are like, even if we aren't like this anymore. Hand in hand with the independence and the self-sufficiency, there is a distrust of the government and social programs. There's a lot of tribalism, insider outsider mentality. If you are a part of our community, then we're going to take care of you. But if you're not a part of our community, then you don't belong here and we're not going to use our resources on you. And there is a heavy perception that Reading is a place for church-going people, that we are heavily religious, we believe in God, and of course, mostly we're Christians. But it's interesting that that perception is not necessarily the case when you look at the data. 27% of people claim to attend religious services weekly as of I believe, 2018 study that I took a look at. And that compares to 31% for all of California. So this study did a national kind of study, a statewide study, and a county-based study. And in all of California, about 31% of people said that they went to religious services weekly, 27% in Shasta County. So, it's not that far off in terms of being about the same. But people in Shasta County think that they are more religious than the rest of California, that the rest of California is filled with heretics and atheists and all this kind of thing. And the data does not pan out that way. It's about the same between Shasta County and the rest of California. So I think these mindsets are going to be important for us to keep in mind as we think about how and why the religious landscape looks the way that it does in Shasta County. So for the rest of the time here, what we're going to do is I'm going to walk you through several different religious traditions. And the way that these traditions have been determined is based on categories that were established by the Association of Religion Data Archives. This is an organization that follows the census. So they try to do it at the same time as the census. But they are asking questions that the US Census does not ask, because the US Census does not ask for religious affiliation information. And it does not provide that information to any organizations lower than kind of some national data that they sometimes have access to. And so, so this group kind of fills in those blanks by doing additional census programming and data collection so that we have a sense of what the religious landscape looks like in America. And then they are able to break down that information into states and even counties. So I really appreciated their work because this is exactly what we needed for today. Unfortunately, their 2020 data is not yet available. It won't probably be available, they said, until spring of next year. And so the data that I'm going to share with you is pretty old at this point. It's from their 2010 data collection research project. But it will, kind of give us a sense of it, and then we can be aware that, things change over time. And once we get the 2022, we can take a look at it maybe if we're interested in that. So the way that this organization organizes its data is under two different categories. They've got the tradition category and they've got the family category. The tradition category is a way of kind of putting different denominations into boxes based on the type of church that they are. And what we're going to talk as we go through these about what makes something a Black Protestant church or an Orthodox church or that kind of thing. And then the families category is looking at historically where that church comes from, which line of Christianity or which thread of Christianity as different splinter groups, came about off of the Catholic Church into the Reformation and so on and so forth. So I'm not going to talk about the families so much today because that's a whole different topic, but I'm going to break down our conversation today into these categories, into the traditions that the Association for Religious Data Archive, ARDA, I guess is how they say it, breaks them down. One thing that I did do, though, is I took the non-denominational category that they have. they have that placed under the evangelical tradition. But because Reading has a very, very heavy non-denominational presence, I thought that it was important for us to look at that one special and in particular. So when we get there, we'll talk about how much they have in common with evangelicals, but also what they have that's different from evangelicals. So that was a choice that I made that was different than what this organization did. So before we plow through these, any questions, comments at this point? Okay, here we go. So we'll start with Black Protestants. Black Protestants come in a variety of flavors in terms of that family aspect that I was talking about. They usually organize themselves similarly and have kind of share the basic religious emphases as their white counterparts. For example, there are Methodist, traditionally Black churches that follow the Methodist polity, organization, governance, and most of their theological positions and their worship practices and things like that. But Black Protestants also have an extra emphasis on freedom and justice, which makes a lot of sense. As slaves would have established their own worshiping communities, they would have been heavily influenced by their owners' tradition. So if the master went to a Methodist church, then that Methodist method of worshiping would have influenced the group, but they would have modified it to fit how they were reading the Bible when they could, and they would have seen the justice aspect, the emancipation aspect, the freedom from captivity aspect that white churches were trying to kind of suppress. Black Protestant churches tend to be economically liberal. Share your money. We need to support people who are impoverished, things like that, but are usually socially conservative. So their positions on social issues like abortion and gay rights and women's rights and those kinds of things are typically going to be conservative. Examples of this type of denomination are the AME Zion Church, Full Gospel Baptist, National Baptist Convention, those types of groups, historically Black churches. And in Shasta County in 2010, we had one Black Protestant congregation. They had 120 members at the time, and that represented 0.07% of the population of Shasta County. So very little Black Protestant representation and presence in Shasta County, but there was and continues to be one congregation, which is the Second Baptist Church. I checked out their Facebook page this week. What's that?
The CME, the minister came and talked with our church this summer because we were supporting their rebuilding with their problem.
Oh, is there a new one?
Yeah, CME, Christian Methodist Episcopal.
Oh, okay. So since 2010, we've now got two, which is great. I didn't know about that one, but I visited the Second Baptist Church Facebook page this week, and their it seemed like their method of worshiping was very similar to your average Baptist church. There was recently a special service on spiritual warfare that they did, and they advertise their worship service. They've got the worship aspect and then the sermon message part, and combined is almost 2 hours long on a Sunday. So don't complain if Bob preaches for a little extra time, because it's not anywhere near the hour that you're going to get if you go to Second Baptist Church. So questions or comments on that one? Thank you for pointing out that extra one there, Pam. I didn't have that data. Great. So moving on to our next tradition is the Catholic tradition. The Catholic tradition is the ancient liturgical sacramental form of Christianity in the West, historically. They emphasize the Trinity and the Incarnation, and they have quite the hierarchy with the Pope, of course, at the top. Examples of Catholic denominations in America. I didn't even know that there was more than one Catholic denomination, the Roman Catholic Church, but there's also the Polish National Catholic Church, which is different from the Roman Catholic Church, and also the United Catholic Church. And there are a couple others too that I didn't write down. But there are several different Catholic churches, but they're pretty much gonna worship in the same type of way, and especially when you're inside the Roman Catholic Church, which is most of them, you're gonna see a Catholic church is a Catholic church for the most part in terms of worship. In 2010, Shasta County had 8 Catholic churches with 8,629 members, representing 4.9% of the population at the time. But something that I do want to point out to you, I just said a Catholic church is a Catholic church, and that's true in terms of the worship service. The priest is going to perform the liturgy the same no matter where you go. That's kind of the point of a Catholic church in terms of worship. But different congregations are going to have different understandings of their role in terms of ministry and service. I don't know a lot about the Catholic churches in Reading, but I went on the websites for Our Lady of Mercy and St. Joseph's just to see kind of what they had out there. And I was struck by how our neighbors next door at Our Lady of Mercy here at St. James have all kinds of community outreach programs. They have a food pantry there 5 days a week in the morning that people can stop by and pick up food. They have a prison visitation ministry where people go and visit with the people who are in the prison. A couple different things like that. Whereas when I went to the St. Joseph's website, I clicked on their ministries tab, and almost all of the ministries that were listed, which were extensive because I believe that they are a bigger congregation than Our Lady of Mercy, but almost all of the ministries were internal services for members of the parish. And so it was, gathering supplies to give to the families of a newborn baby who goes to that church, or making meals for the bereaved who have lost members of their family of people who go to that church. Those types of things. And so there's more of kind of a serving each other mentality, it seems, at least from what I gleaned from their website at St. Joseph's, whereas Our Lady of Mercy seems to be more interested in serving outside of the church walls and the people who gather there on any given Sunday. So I thought that was really interesting that those differences would be so stark, at least in terms of the way that they advertise themselves. It's possible that they have other stuff going on that I don't know about that wasn't on the website, but they really need to put it on there if that's the case, because they are putting out a particular perception that they might not know about.
Our Lady of Mercy partners with us at the Hope Band every month.
Mm-hmm.
So I know they're out there.
Yeah. All right, next up, we've got our evangelicals. So this is based on what I've done with pulling non-denominational out. This is the second largest group in Reading. Characteristics of evangelical types of tradition churches, emphasizing that personal relationship with Christ. You have to have a personal moment of conversion where you choose God. Emphasizing the Bible as inerrant, kind of the God wrote this and it fell out of the sky, and you don't get to question it. The assumption that the Bible is clear and only has one meaning, which I think I don't have to even say that I totally disagree with that. And then the emphasis on sharing your faith, on converting other people, which is why they're called evangelical, sharing the good news, trying to get people to join. And most of the time they are more theologically and socially conservative than other churches. Evangelicals on this list with the organization that collected this data is by far the largest group in terms of the number of denominations that fall under this tradition category. And I think that's because they are the most likely to split. They are often the newest denominations, and so they have that history, that recent history of, not liking something that another group is doing, and so they leave and start their own church, their own denomination. Examples of this type of denomination: Assemblies of God, Free Lutherans, Brethren in Christ, Christian and Missionary Alliance, Salvation Army, Church of the Nazarene, Southern Baptist Convention, Missouri Synod. The Missouri Synod and Wisconsin Synod Lutheran churches are considered evangelical because they have very specific conservative social and theological positions, and are kind of part of this, break off group as they left the ELCA. Shasta County's 2010 statistics: there were 82 evangelical congregations in Shasta County from 25 different denominations, representing about 14,000 members. I had to do an about on this one because there were several churches that were listed that didn't have any data. They did not report in, I guess, properly, and so they weren't sure what to put for them. So approximately 14,000 members, making up about 7.9% of the population of Shasta County at that time. Examples of, Karen, were you going to say something?
Well, I just wondered about us. We're the Evangelical Lutheran Church of America, but we don't fall under this category.
No, we do not. We do not.
Okay.
So that's an interesting story. So Luther did not want his church to be called Lutheran. He didn't believe that it was his church. He believed that it was Christ's church. He wanted it to be called the Evangelical Church. And to him, evangelical means good news. He was all about God's grace for us.
Okay.
He wanted to emphasize that the good news aspect of it. But over the course of time, evangelical has become kind of its own thing. And so it's really interesting because people who aren't familiar with us as the ELCA think that because evangelical is in our name, that we worship the way that, we worship the way that your standard evangelicals do, that we believe the same things that your standard evangelicals do. And so they show up for worship and they're like, where's the praise band? Where's the extended worship where there are many songs in a row? Where's the altar call? Where's the pastor getting up there and preaching fire at us? Where's the big stage with all the lights and flashy stuff? And that it's that misunderstanding of what evangelical means in Lutheran circles. So it's an interesting challenge.
Yeah.
For our denomination. So some examples of evangelical churches in Reading. I looked up the Stirring. The Stirring, at first I actually thought the Stirring was going to be a non-denominational church, but they, in a little tucked away in a little corner on their website, I found that they are actually a Christian and Missionary Alliance church. So they do come from a particular denomination. On their website, they claim that their tagline is, "We love, we make disciples, period." And taglines are like this anywhere you go, so I'm not criticizing them in particular, but when I read that, I just started to think of some questions. Who do you love? What does it mean to make a disciple? What does discipleship look like? What are you supposed to be doing or believing in order to be a disciple? Can someone do something that makes them unlovable? Those kinds of questions came up as I was, looking over their website, and there were no answers to any of those questions. So I wonder, how they might answer those questions. I also looked at the Church of the Nazarene up there on Hilltop, or not on Hilltop, on Bocelli on the other side of the highway. Their website has a heavy emphasis on the quote, scriptural holiness. And the Nazarenes come through the Methodist family, and so they believe in sanctification. They believe that it is possible for us to become perfect in our behavior and belief and adhering to God's law. And so because it's possible, we're supposed to do it. So they believe that the Bible is inspired by God and that we're supposed to use the Bible to help us focus on correct behaviors and beliefs. But scriptural holiness is their big thing. And then I also looked up the Mount Calvary, the Wisconsin Lutheran Synod Church, which as I've not interacted with them at all, I know that they don't talk to us here at St. James, but I also have heard that they are not quite as conservative, at least outwardly, as some of the Wisconsin Synod churches back east. And I know that because back east, if you went to a Wisconsin Synod church as a woman, you would note that on every pew rack, there was a little plaque that said, "Women, please do not touch the Bible." That was how the Wisconsin Synod people were known. But on Mount Calvary's website,
never heard that.
Yeah, on Mount Calvary's website, it says that their focus is on answering the question, what does the Bible say? God's 100% reliable word is going to guide us in our lives. And so kind of one of those, very, very literalistic, very fundamentalist understandings of the Bible, where there is no gray area. There's only one interpretation, which is standard for evangelical churches. So this is, like I said, the second most populated group within Shasta County, and actually the non-denominational that we're going to talk about in a little bit kind of is supposed to fall under this according to this organization, but I wanted to break it out and talk about them in particular a little bit, so we'll do that. So mainline Protestants are theologically liberal and moderate sometimes. They emphasize the social and community impact of faith rather than more the personal impact of faith. Example denominations in the United States include the Episcopal Church, the United Methodist Church, the United Church of Christ, the ELCA, the Presbyterian Church USA. These are all considered mainline Protestants. In Shasta County in 2010, there were 12 mainline congregations from 7 different denominations with 2,570 members, which represents 1.5% of the population. I think that mainline Protestants are really cool, not just because I am one, but because they come from all over the map in terms of which family they developed from. But what they did was they developed their theology kind of in some cases away from or maintained as others fell away and developed more conservative theologies. They developed these liberal theologies about the value of human lives and the importance of what God is doing here on earth and not just in the world to come, things like that. And so, for example, First Christian, our friends at the Disciples of Christ Church, developed from a Baptist background. Their website talks about believers' baptism. You choose God, others don't choose God for you. They talk about socially and theologically liberal ideas. So you would think, a Baptist church typically is very conservative. All their pastors are men for the most part. They are anti-abortion, they are anti-gay marriage, all these different things. But the Disciples of Christ, kind of reimagined what it means to be a Baptist, and came to a completely different conclusion on that. All Saints Episcopal comes from an Anglican background, which is also interesting because Anglicans kind of believe that they are the Catholic Church based on their history. So interesting way to some stuff we could talk about there if we wanted to sometime. St. James, of course, is from the ELCA, so they're Lutheran background, and for the most part, kind of the standard Lutheran church in America from the beginning, as other denominations have kind of broken off into other Lutheran groups. And Pilgrim, the UCC, has a Presbyterian background, so a Presbyterian governance with kind of more democratic governance than most churches have, and pretty much a Presbyterian type of worship, a Reformed type of worship. So all these different families that these groups come from, but they're all lumped together because they have kind of come to the same conclusions about God and the purpose of life and things like that, which I think is awesome. I appreciate that.
Katie,
Yes.
would you say the Methodists came from the Anglican too?
The Methodists came through the Presbyterians, sort of. They came through, John Wesley, but they, in terms of this database, they have their own category. Methodist Pietist is one of the families that is listed.
Okay.
Yeah, sometime we could do kind of like a history of denominations class. That might be interesting to follow the threads sometime.
And how the Quakers fit in? Are they where are they in these groups?
Quakers are under other, so we get to other. It's my favorite category, other. So Orthodox.
The history was really, well, for the last many generations, are really strict Methodists. But in the 1600s, they were jailed for being Quakers. So it's just, I don't know.
Interesting.
I don't know if I'm ever going to know more than that. So
yeah, interesting. So I was surprised, and I should not be because I drive past them all the time, but I was surprised to find out that we have some Orthodox churches in Reading. Orthodoxy is the Eastern equivalent of the Catholicism in the West. They are the ancient liturgical sacramental form of Christianity in the East. They also emphasize the Trinity and Incarnation. They also have a hierarchy, but they don't have the Pope at the top. They have their own hierarchical system. And in America, most Orthodox churches are based on nationality or ethnicity. But there are some that are not based on nationality and ethnicity. So examples are like the Albanian Orthodox Church, the Greek Orthodox Church, the Russian Orthodox Church, but there are some that don't claim any kind of national or ethnic affiliation as well. In Shasta County in 2010, there were 5 Orthodox congregations with 191 members, representing 0.1% of the population. And examples are St. George is a Greek Orthodox church in downtown, and St. Andrew Full for Christ, which was a name I really liked, which is a Serbian Orthodox church. Of the 5 in Shasta County in 2010, 3 of them were Serbian Orthodox churches. I thought that was interesting that ended up with a lot of people of Serbian background here, I guess, at the one point. So questions, comments on this one?
Are the other 2 Greek?
There was 1 Greek, 3 Serbian Orthodox, and 1 Orthodox church in America. So that's one of those denominations that does not have a national affiliation. But I couldn't find it online, so I think it has closed. All right, so now the non-denominational. So like I said before, the people who did the data collection put non-denominational under evangelical because they do have a lot of shared characteristics. But because Shasta County has such a large population of non-denominational Christians, I thought it was important for us to just talk about them kind of separately. So if you want to, in your mind, you can kind of combine the evangelical and the non-denominational in the data and see, just how big this group is compared to all the other groups in Shasta County. But I wanted to split it out just so that we could talk a little bit more about it. Because non-denominational churches heavily emphasize their non-affiliation. They are not part of a denomination. They claim to be separated out from all tradition. They claim that they are following nothing but the Bible. They do not follow any kind of church authority. They do not follow any kind of tradition. They follow the Bible alone. Now, of course, this is not true because all of them are influenced by other denominations from which they came, if they split off or, formed their own thing with the people that started it. But this is kind of their self-perception. Additionally, you might find it interesting that most non-denominational churches, especially like the mega churches that have multiple campuses and things like that, end up borrowing terminologies from other churches, like having boards of elders and having a bishop who is kind of the main pastor of the main church, and then having sub-pastors, who serve the other churches and things like that. But because their governance is within rather than from another group outside of themselves, they feel that they are able then to follow the Bible and follow, their own authority rather than the authority of someone else. Typically, non-denominational churches focus on a seeker's theology. They emphasize the idea that everyone is looking for something, and we're looking for the people who are looking for something to help them to find it. And they are very close theologically to the evangelical Protestants, but the big difference is that they reject denominationalism. So a Southern Baptist is going to be under the evangelical category. Somebody who goes to Bethel or Crosspoint Community Church is going to also be under that evangelical umbrella, but I split them out because they are non-denominational. They don't have an affiliation with a denominational body. So examples of non-denominational churches include a vast spectrum from mega churches like Willow Creek or Bethel, all the way down to storefront churches that worship with 10 people who don't like what the denominations say, and so they want to worship on their own. In Reading, we had 27 of these churches in 2010 with 15,194 members. Of course, a lot of those members were Bethel members. Bethel now has 11,000 members. I don't know how many they had in 2010. But in 2010, the 15,000 represented 8.6% of the population of Shasta County. I took a little bit of a look at the Bethel website and the Crosspoint Community Church website. Bethel because they're the big one, and Crosspoint because they're down the street from us. Bethel has a heavy emphasis on what they call personal revival, manifesting God's love in their lives, in signs, wonders, and miracles, they say. And so it's about changing our lives. It's about reviving and renewing ourselves as individuals so that we can manifest God's love through signs, wonders, and miracles. Crosspoint I thought was really interesting because when I went searching for them and to look at their website, I was under the impression, I was assuming that they were actually a Southern Baptist church because I know that one of their pastors, one of their chaplains, is affiliated with the Southern Baptist Disaster Relief. And so because he works there and also represents Southern Baptist Disaster Relief, I thought that they were a Southern Baptist church. But their website doesn't have any indication that they are connected to a denomination. They are an independent church. And so you can see the close relationships that these non-denominational churches have with Baptist churches. The Liberty Christian School that is hosted by Crosspoint Community Church was actually founded by Grace Baptist, and they were going to close it until Crosspoint stepped in and offered to house them. And so there's this very tight relationship with this denominationalized church, but they claim their own unaffiliated governance. So non-denominational pretty much falls under evangelical, but this extra idea of our self-governance or our self-reliance is important to them. And then finally, we have the other category, which I just love. Under other, there is nothing in common except that they don't fit into any of the other categories. So I picked out a couple of different groups that were in Shasta County in numbers in 2010, but just general examples that would fall under the other category include Buddhist, Mormon, various types of Judaisms, Unitarian Universalists, Jehovah's Witnesses, and Church of Christ Scientists were some of the ones that I picked out from their list. So in Shasta County in 2010, we had 84 Baha'i. Baha'i is a religion that was founded in the 19th century in Persia, so it's fairly new. There were about 110,000 Baha'i in America in 1992, so fairly small religious group in America, but 84 is nothing to sneeze at in terms of Shasta County. There were 11 people who claimed to be Buddhists. This one is awesome. I think this is super interesting. So Mormons, there were 11 Mormon congregations, Latter-day Saints congregations in Shasta County with 6,843 members, which represents 3.9% of the population. When you look at national data about Mormonism in America, nationally, about 2% of Americans are Mormons. And if you take Utah out of the equation, since that's the big place for Mormons to be, it's about 1.4%. And so we have twice as many Mormons in Shasta County as the national average, which I think is really interesting. I was not aware of that. I don't know that many people who are Mormon, or at least, they haven't told me that they're Mormon. So I think that's fascinating. And compared to California, it doesn't have a particularly high Mormon population in general. It's in that 2% range with the national average. So there's something about Shasta County, I guess, that attracts the Mormons more so than others. For Judaism, there was only one type of Judaism in Shasta County in 2010, and that was Reform Judaism. They had 158 members at their one congregation, representing 0.09% of the population. And the database had an indication that there was one congregation of 6 in Shasta County, but they had no data about how many people were part of that. But now there are 2 Sikh Gurdwaras in Anderson. And so that is definitely a growing population in our community. I couldn't find any information about how many Sikhs there are, but we'll find out more about that when the new 2020 data comes out. And I think that will be really interesting to know, because that's an interesting and cool connection that we could potentially make with a growing community. So questions, comments on our categories here?
Yeah, I'm surprised there's only 11 Buddhists. Because
it's in 2010, so they've had 10 more years to move in.
So maybe I know all of them.
A lot of Buddhists kind of double dip in when they define themselves. They might say they're Lutheran and Buddhist.
Mm. Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
You should ask them.
Since 2010, that's a long time ago.
Yeah, so I'm sure that this data is not super accurate anymore, because we could have had a huge influx of Buddhists or people converting to Buddhism, or what have you, in the last 10 years. So I'll be really interested to see the comparative data when that comes out next year.
That'd be you'll have to do another class on that when it comes out.
Yeah.
Do you know, does Pathways have a denominational connection? Do you know?
I did not look at them.
I haven't looked them up. Yeah.
It's really, sometimes with those evangelical churches, it's really hard to find their denomination if they have one.
Yeah.
They're really, it's interesting because they know that all those mega churches are non-denominational. And so they kind of hide their denominational affiliation.
Yeah, they don't want
to try to kind of go, both sides. They take advantage of the denominational support, but then they also advertise themselves as independent.
I ended up yesterday looking up something for our online ministry, but it was a Lutheran church in Orange, California, and I looked on their website, didn't say ELCA or it didn't say Missouri Synod. And I was trying to tell from the website, and I had to go off their website and just into something else to find out that they were Missouri Synod, which I thought they were since they weren't saying, but for some reason they purposely were not connecting to Missouri.
Yeah, that's really, it's a fascinating trend in the evangelical circles that in order to try to attract people, you have to divorce yourself from your denomination because especially, you know, and that, I think that's, you know, that's something that I think we want to talk about today is this idea like this. So I made a pie chart. It was really fun. I went on a website and found how you can make a pie chart. So this is all of the data. Like I said, I thought this was really interesting because that statistic that I had looked up, that 27% of Shasta Countyans go to religious services every week. This total equals about 27% of the full population of Shasta County. So I thought that was cool that kind of worked out. But so what I did was I took all the people who had claimed a religious affiliation in Shasta County with this 2010 study, and then I divided those out with 100%. So this doesn't include the unaffiliated, 72% or 73% of people. This is just the religiously affiliated ones. But if you look at it, like I said, non-denominational, I split out, but if they are kind of considered part of the evangelical tradition, that's way more than half of our pie chart is evangelical. The Catholics have a little under a quarter. The Mormons have a good, maybe fifth there. And then the mainlines have a sliver big enough to at least see. And then the rest are just, teensy weensy little slivers.
Yeah.
And so, I do want to talk about this because I think that it makes sense why the chart would look this way. When we think about the mindset of Reading, my religion, my choice. I want to have control over my religion. I don't want to have anybody else telling me what to do. And so this idea that we would, be part of a religious tradition that doesn't have any kind of explicit hierarchy, that we want to hide our religious denominational affiliations if we have one, so that people don't know that they are, following the rules of some person in some office somewhere in Washington, D.C. or wherever it is. Also the emphasis on my personal relationship with Jesus. I want my privacy. I want this to be my personal choice about my personal values. I don't want to have to make decisions based on what anybody else thinks or what anybody else needs. I want it to be about me. I've isolated myself intentionally so that I don't have to interact with other people, so that I don't have to consider the needs of other people. And so it really does fit, I think, the kind of people who live in Reading would be attracted to these types of places. But I think that also gives us as mainline Christians a unique position, because even though I don't think that denominations in and of themselves are bad, I do think that there are some bad faith denominations out there that are trying to take advantage of people, trying to, fleece people for their money, or even if they have fairly good intentions in terms of what they really believe this stuff and are really trying to save people. There's a lot of harmful stuff out there about hell and torture and damnation and punishment and things that are harming the souls and bodies of the people that God loves. And so the message I think that we have can be redemptive for those people who are really struggling with that, especially for people who have kind of started to move away from evangelicalism. There's even a word for that nowadays, ex-evangelicals.
Oh, really?
those people are looking for something. You know, they're looking for a new spirituality, a new way of understanding God, and we are in a unique position to say there is a different way. There is something else. You don't have to just give up and become an atheist or start from scratch all on your own. We have a whole different language. We have a whole different set of assumptions. We have a whole different set of values that might be, you know, more meaningful for you in your walk, and more uplifting and supportive for you in your relationship with God. So I think that is an important place that we can, you know, important gap that we can uniquely fill in our community as mainline Protestants. So what comments, questions, discussion ideas do you have here?
Well, I'm not surprised about the non-denominational and the evangelical, the number of them, especially since Bethel's here. I mean, Bethel's attracting people from all over the world, and there's always been, you know, we've lived here for 58 years, something like that. And there's always been this pressure to be part of a church, to be, you know, like for instance, if you were going to run for political office, you need to be associated with the church. And it's a really important element. And it always has been. I mean, and especially for those types of churches. The Mormons don't surprise me. You know, there's a lot. My first superintendent was Mormon, and I've always known there was a big church, you know, big church presence of the Mormons here. I don't know why, but it kind of bothers me that us mainline people are so little compared to everybody else. Looks like we're getting squeezed out. But I think some people that have been to the evangelical and non-denominational are coming to us because they like the liturgy and the tradition and the calmness of our church, you know. I mean, that was one of the things that attracted me. When I was singing a hymn and I looked at the date that it was printed or invented, it was way back in the, you know, way back. And that really, I really liked that for hundreds of years, people had been singing that hymn.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that appeals to certain people, you know, that they like the tradition.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. My son-in-law's mother is a Mormon, and it's a different kind of religion.
Mm-hmm. Yes, they fall under other.
But you know, but one of their big selling points is taking care of each other, and you know, stockpiling. I remember we had this one friend, and she was buying like 100 pounds of wheat or something like that. I couldn't believe. I said, "What are you going to do with all that?" She said, "Well, I use it to make bread and stuff like that." But they have stockpiles of food, mm-hmm. you know. So in case the end comes, I guess. I don't know.
Yes, I would not make a good Mormon. My refrigerator is always empty.
Mine too.
What, Pam?
To be one of them to be taken care of. They don't take care of anybody else, was what I thought.
I think so too.
Yeah.
I think so too. I think they just take care of themselves. You know, I got an interesting thing in the mail a week or so ago from a lady. She didn't put her last name, but she lives on Main Street in Shasta Lake. And she sent me a letter about my husband passing and how sorry she was, and a pamphlet from Jehovah's Witnesses, Can the Dead Really Live Again?
Mm.
And yeah. But she didn't want to intrude on my privacy, so she sent a letter. But I think maybe that's part of it too. You know, I've heard that Bethel has prayer services where they try to pray somebody back to life. And maybe what generates a lot of this movement is fear.
Oh, yeah.
Where I think our church is just the opposite. You know, we don't operate out of fear. We operate out of knowing where we're going and being joyful. Mm-hmm. They operate out of, well, I'm not going to have enough to eat. I'm not going to have enough money. I'm not going to go to heaven. All these things, you know, there's fears.
Yeah, that's sad.
Karen, that's really interesting because we got a letter. John got a letter from a person on Main Street in Shasta Lake City. And it was personalized probably to us. And it costs a lot to do mass mailings with stamps the way they are nowadays. And she referred to the pamphlet that she forgot to put in. But I think it's probably the same person. I think that's an interesting way to reach out.
Her name is Rebecca D. She didn't put her last name.
I'd have to go look, but yeah, I think we probably got the same.
And it's all handwritten. I couldn't even write that long without my arm tired. It's front and back. It's a 2-pager, you know.
Wow.
We just got a 1-page and they forgot the insert. So, you know.
Oh, gosh.
But it makes you wonder. I mean, when you look at our little slice of the pie, how are we reaching out to people? What, you know, are we just, I don't know. I mean, I think we attract people, but how? I don't know how we do that.
Methodists do a lot. And I think Pilgrim does as much as they can. We just don't have very many of us. So, you know. But look at what the Methodists did. I mean, they're the ones that started the Whole Earth Festival. You know, and they bought those houses in the garden tract that they still have, that they, you know, rent to people. I don't know what all they do. They had that thing on the bridge for years about the African situation. And what else? They just seem to do a lot.
So what do the non-denominational churches and evangelical churches do in the community?
Start theory.
A lot. They do a lot, really. They get involved wherever they can.
They gave the police department $500,000 a couple of years ago.
Oh, that's true. And they did that. Yeah.
They took over the Civic Center.
Yeah, that's true. And they're buying all the businesses.
Yeah, we went to Theory last week, and it was just really, really cool. Then I came home and discovered it's a Bethel business.
they're everywhere.
There. Yeah. And I understand Hobby Lobby put an ad out, a full-page ad, not in Reading, but other places in the country that states that our leaders should all be Christians.
Yeah.
Which is interesting. So I suppose they define Christian in a specific manner, but that was
absolutely.
Yeah.
Joe Biden is not a Christian.
And Bethel would have the same kind of theology.
Yeah.
And Creighton, Cracker Barrel is evangelical. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, they'd have to be where they are, you know.
And the chicken place. What's the chicken place?
They're coming out.
Chick-fil-A, yeah.
Chick-fil-A.
Yeah.
So that's how they're reaching out. Yeah.
All right. Well, I have, as I usually try to do, I have something for us to reflect on from the Bible. I'm going to read to you Micah chapter 6, verses 6 through 8. And this has a little bit of the beginning and a little bit of the end for you to focus in on. With what shall I come before the Lord and bow myself before God on high? Shall I come before him with burnt offerings, with calves for a year old? Will the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams, with 10,000s of rivers of oil? Shall I give my firstborn for my transgression, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul? He has told you, O mortal, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? But to do justice and to love kindness and to walk humbly with your God.
I love that one.
Mhm.
So what's important? So no class next week. Next week is Veterans Day, Thursday.
Oh.
And I will be away at a leadership writing event that day.
Oh. I'll be gone too, so that works out.
Okay,
right?
So we will come back together on November 18th for our next class, and we're going to talk about the question, was Judas necessary?
I was thinking this was your last slide of our topic, and I was just like, where's she going with it?
No. Preview for next time.
I figured it out, but it's a little jarring at first. Oh, well, thank you, Katie.
Thank you.
And yeah.
Hope everybody has a good week.
Yeah.
2 weeks.
Okay.
And we'll see you again on the 18th.
All righty.
Okay,
See you
great.
then. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.